What happens when the person who saves your life is the same one who teaches you how to live it? Marcus Thornton did not believe in fate. He believed in strategy, in calculated risks, in the kind of precision that had built his tech empire from a college dorm room into a billion-dollar enterprise. But the motorcycle accident on Pacific Coast Highway did not care about strategy. It simply happened, leaving behind a body that refused to obey and a mind that could not forgive itself for the loss. 3 years had passed since that morning when the sun had been too bright and the curve too sharp. 3 years since the surgeons had explained, with carefully measured words, that the spinal cord damage was permanent. 3 years since Marcus had retreated to his oceanfront estate in Malibu, watching the Pacific from behind floor-to-ceiling windows, like a man observing his own funeral. The house was a masterpiece of accessible design, a testament to what unlimited resources could achieve when applied to the problem of physical limitation. Wide corridors flowed from room to room without threshold or obstruction. Automatic doors responded to the proximity sensors on his wheelchair, gliding open and closed with silent efficiency. A state-of-the-art elevator connected all 3 floors, its interior spacious enough for the chair and anyone who might accompany him. The kitchen counters were adjustable, rising and lowering at the touch of a button. The bathrooms featured roll-in showers with therapeutic water jets and grab bars that had been designed to look like architectural features rather than medical equipment. Outside, the grounds had been equally transformed. Paved paths wound through the garden, their surfaces textured for traction, but smooth enough for easy navigation. The heated infinity pool boasted a hydraulic lift that could lower him into the water and raise him back out, though he had never used it. A private stretch of beach, accessible via a specially constructed ramp, offered views of the Pacific that cost $37 million, and now served only to remind him of everything he had lost. Everything had been adapted, modified, made possible. Everything except the man inside it. His staff operated with mechanical efficiency, their movements choreographed to minimize intrusion while maximizing care. The morning nurse arrived at 7, a soft-spoken woman named Margaret who checked his vitals and administered his medications with the detached professionalism of someone who had long ago learned not to become emotionally invested in her patients. The physical therapist came at 9, a former Olympic athlete named Thomas, who pushed him through exercises that maintained what muscle tone remained, but could never restore what was gone. The chef prepared meals he barely touched, elaborate creations that grew cold while he stared at screens or out at the endless blue of the ocean. They addressed him as Mr. Thornton, always Mr. Thornton, with voices that carried the particular softness reserved for the sick and the broken. They moved around him like water around a stone, careful never to make waves, never to look too long at the wheelchair that had become his constant companion. When they spoke to each other, which they rarely did in his presence, their conversation stopped abruptly the moment he entered a room. Marcus preferred it that way. He had constructed an empire on the principle that emotions were inefficiencies to be eliminated, and his disability had only reinforced this belief. If he could not walk, he could still work. If he could not feel his legs, he would learn to feel nothing at all. It was easier that way. Cleaner. The alternative, allowing himself to grieve what he had lost, seemed like an abyss from which he might never return. The day everything changed began like any other Tuesday in late September. The marine layer had burned off by noon, leaving the sky a perfect, merciless blue. The gardening crew had come and gone in the morning, their trucks rumbling up the driveway at dawn and departing by 11, leaving behind the scent of fresh-cut grass and pruned roses. Marcus had ignored them, as he ignored most intrusions into his carefully constructed solitude. But something drew him outside that afternoon, some restless impulse he did not care to examine. He told himself it was simply cabin fever, the accumulated weight of too many days spent in his temperature-controlled, humidity-regulated cocoon. He wheeled himself onto the lower terrace, the one that overlooked the pool and the ocean beyond it, and sat for a while in the warmth of the September sun. The pool sparkled invitingly, its water the same impossible turquoise as the Pacific just beyond the cliff's edge. A light breeze rippled its surface, creating patterns that reminded him of something he could not quite name. Perhaps the way his thoughts used to move when he was younger, fluid and free, unencumbered by the weight of all he had accumulated and all he had lost. He had not been in that pool since before the accident. Swimming had been one of his great pleasures once, a daily ritual that cleared his mind and strengthened his body. He would rise at 5, while the sky was still pink with dawn, and cut through the water with powerful strokes, back and forth, until his muscles burned, and his mind was empty of everything except the rhythm of movement. Those morning swims had been sacred, the only time he allowed himself to simply exist rather than plan or strategize or optimize. Now the water represented everything he had lost, and he avoided it with the same determination he applied to avoiding mirrors. The hydraulic lift had been installed, tested, certified by 3 different safety engineers, and then ignored. His therapist had suggested water therapy. His doctor had recommended it for pain management. He had refused both, unable to articulate why the very sight of that turquoise surface filled him with a dread that bordered on physical pain. But today, something pulled him closer. Perhaps it was the way the afternoon light played on the surface, fracturing into diamonds when the breeze picked up. Perhaps it was the sound of the water lapping against the infinity edge, a gentle rhythm that reminded him of quieter times. Or perhaps it was simply the accumulated weight of 3 years of absence, 3 years of avoiding, 3 years of not living the life he had so carefully preserved. He dismissed his afternoon nurse with a wave of his hand, insisting he wanted to be alone. Margaret hesitated, her professional concern evident in the slight furrow of her brow, but years of working with difficult patients had taught her when to push and when to yield. She nodded, gathered her things, and retreated into the house with a final reminder that she would be in the staff quarters if he needed anything. Marcus waited until he heard the click of the interior door, then guided his wheelchair toward the pool. The chair hummed softly beneath him, a sound he had grown so accustomed to that he barely noticed it anymore. He navigated around the lounge chairs, past the outdoor shower station, along the edge of the deep end, where the water was darkest and most inviting. He stopped at the very edge, where the pool's infinity design created the illusion that the water merged seamlessly with the horizon. From this angle, if he tilted his head just right, he could almost pretend that the pool and the ocean were one continuous expanse, a private sea that belonged to him alone. The view was spectacular. It always was. He had paid $37 million for that view, and in the years before the accident, he had considered it money well spent. Now he could not even enjoy it, could not look at the water without remembering what it felt like to move through it, to feel it part around his body, to emerge breathless and exhilarated with muscles pleasantly fatigued. His hands trembled slightly on the wheelchair controls. Just a little closer, he thought. Just close enough to feel the spray when the wind picked up, to smell the chlorine mingled with salt from the nearby ocean. It was not about getting in. It was just about being near, about reclaiming some small piece of what the accident had stolen. The wheel caught on something. Later he would learn that it was a raised tile, a minor imperfection in the pool deck that the maintenance crew had been scheduled to repair the following week. In the moment, he knew only that the chair lurched suddenly sideways, that his instinctive attempt to correct sent it careening further off balance, and that gravity was claiming him with greedy, indifferent hands. He fell. The impact with the water was cold and shocking, driving the air from his lungs in a single explosive burst. The pool swallowed him whole, closing over his head with a finality that felt like judgment. His arms thrashed uselessly, fighting against water that seemed suddenly thick and resistant. His legs, those useless appendages of dead nerve and atrophied muscle, dragged him down like anchors. Panic erased everything. All his carefully cultivated detachment, all his emotional control, all his acceptance of his condition. None of it mattered when he was sinking into that chlorinated blue, his lungs burning for air he could not reach. The surface receded above him, a shimmering ceiling of light that grew more distant with each passing second. He opened his mouth to scream, but water rushed in instead, choking and terrible. This is it, he thought with strange clarity. This is how it ends. Not with a press conference or a farewell to his board of directors, or any of the dignified conclusions he might have imagined in his darker moments. Just drowning alone in his own pool, a cautionary tale that would make excellent fodder for the business press. Tech billionaire found dead in luxury pool. The irony would not be lost on his competitors. Strong hands seized the back of his shirt. He felt himself being hauled upward, felt the drag of the water against his body as someone fought to bring him to the surface. Air, blessed air, suddenly filled his lungs as his head broke free of the water. He coughed and gasped and coughed again, expelling what felt like gallons of chlorinated water, while those same strong hands dragged him toward the shallow end. Somehow, impossibly, he was lying on the warm stone of the pool deck, staring up at a sky that seemed impossibly blue, and a woman he had never seen before. She was soaking wet, her dark hair plastered to her face in chaotic waves. Her clothes, a simple work outfit of khaki pants and a navy polo shirt, clung to her frame, heavy with water. There was dirt on her cheek and grass stains on her knees, evidence of whatever she had been doing before she dove into the pool. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving with exertion, but her eyes never left his face. Those eyes, dark brown and fierce with something that might have been anger, seemed to see right through him. Not through his disability, not through his wealth, not through any of the barriers he had carefully constructed, just through to whatever remained of the man he used to be. "Breathe," she commanded. Her voice was sharp, urgent, allowing no room for argument. "Come on, breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. Again." He obeyed, too shocked to do anything else. Water streamed from his clothes, pooling beneath him on the sun-warmed stone. His shoulder ached where it had struck the side of the pool during his fall, and his throat burned from the water he had swallowed. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might crack his ribs, a desperate rhythm that screamed of survival and fear. "Where is everybody?" The woman was on her feet now, scanning the house with barely contained fury. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her whole body vibrating with an energy that seemed barely contained. "Where's your staff? Your nurses? Anyone?" He tried to answer, but another coughing fit seized him, doubling him over on the pool deck. She knelt beside him again, one hand on his shoulder, steadying him until the spasm passed. Her touch was firm but not rough, competent in a way that spoke of experience with crisis. "I sent them away," he managed finally, his voice raw and strange in his own ears. "I wanted to be alone." She stared at him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen for the first time in years. Not seen as an invalid to be managed. Not seen as a checkbook to be cultivated. Not seen as a cautionary tale or a source of pity or any of the other ways people had looked at him since the accident. Just seen. "Well," she said, and her voice had softened slightly, though the fire in her eyes remained. "That worked out great, didn't it? Despite everything, despite the near-death experience and the cold creeping into his bones and the profound humiliation of being rescued by what appeared to be his own gardener, Marcus Thornton laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed and strange, pulling at muscles in his face and chest that had atrophied from disuse. It surprised them both, hanging in the air between them like something wild and unexpected. She allowed herself a small smile, just a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth. "There he is," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I was wondering if you were still in there." Her name was Elena Vasquez. He learned this later, after she had helped him back into his wheelchair, after the staff had come running at her shouts, after the chaos of towels and blankets, and the doctor being called, had finally subsided. She was the new groundskeeper, hired 2 weeks ago to replace the elderly man who had retired after 20 years of service. She had been trimming the jasmine along the south wall when she saw his chair tip into the pool. The jasmine along the south wall was at least 100 feet from the pool. She had covered that distance in seconds, launching herself over a decorative hedge and sprinting across the lawn with a speed that would have impressed the Olympic coaches who sometimes used the nearby track. She had kicked off her work boots at the edge of the pool and dove in without hesitation, despite the fact that she was not, as she freely admitted, a particularly strong swimmer. "I didn't think," she told him later, when the doctor had pronounced him shaken but unharmed, and the house had settled into an uneasy quiet. They were in his study, she in a borrowed robe that was far too large for her, he in dry clothes that his nurse had somehow managed to help him into despite his protests. "I just saw you fall and I ran." "Can you swim?" he asked, genuinely curious. The question seemed important somehow, though he could not have explained why. She shrugged, a casual movement that belied the seriousness of what she had done. "Enough. Not well. I learned in a public pool when I was a teenager, and I haven't practiced much since, but enough to get across a swimming pool and drag someone to the shallow end. You could have drowned. So could you." She met his gaze steadily, without flinching or looking away. "But here we are. Here we are," he repeated silently. Two survivors on the wrong side of disaster, dripping onto expensive Italian leather furniture. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was, he realized with growing unease, the most alive he had felt since the accident. "Why?" he asked. The question emerged before he could stop it, rough and raw. "You don't know me. You've worked here for 2 weeks. Why risk your life for a stranger?" Elena considered the question, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I grew up in foster care," she said finally. 12 different homes before I aged out of the system. I learned early that the world is full of people who look away when someone is drowning, who tell themselves it's not their problem, or someone else will handle it, or maybe that person wanted to drown anyway. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "I promised myself a long time ago that I would never be one of those people. If I see someone in trouble and I can help, I help. End of story." It was such a simple philosophy, such a direct and uncomplicated way of moving through the world. Marcus, who had spent decades analyzing motivations and calculating advantages, found himself utterly disarmed by it. "Thank you," he said. The words seemed inadequate, but they were all he had. "You're welcome." She rose from her chair, the borrowed robe pooling around her feet. "I should go, get changed, let you rest." "Wait." She paused at the door, turning back with an expression of patient inquiry. "I want to offer you a different position. Not groundskeeper. Something else." Her eyebrows rose. "What kind of position?" "I don't know yet, but I want you around. I want—" He struggled to articulate something he did not fully understand himself. "Everyone who works in this house treats me like I'm made of glass. They're afraid of me, or afraid of my money, or afraid of saying the wrong thing. You're not afraid of any of that. You don't know that. You've talked to me for maybe 10 minutes total. I know that you jumped into a pool to save a stranger without thinking twice. I know that when everyone else was panicking, you were yelling at me to breathe. I know that you're the first person in 3 years who's looked at me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed." Elena was quiet for a long moment. He could see her thinking, weighing his words against her own instincts and experiences. Her face was remarkably expressive, he realized. Every thought and feeling seemed to flicker across it like weather across a sky. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "But I'm not making any promises, and I'm not going to be someone's charity case or experimental project. That's not what I'm offering. Then what are you offering?" It was a fair question, and one he did not have a good answer for. What did he want from her? A companion? A friend? Someone who would look at him the way she had looked at him by the pool, without fear or pity or careful distance? "Honesty," he said. I'm offering you a job that pays better than groundskeeping, with better hours and better accommodations. In exchange, I'm asking for honesty. For someone who won't treat me like I'm already dead." Elena studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she finally nodded. "I'll think about it," she repeated. "Good night, Mr. Thornton." "Marcus," he called after her. "My name is Marcus." She glanced back over her shoulder. "Good night, Mr. Thornton," she said again, and closed the door behind her. Marcus sat alone in his study for a long time after she left, staring at the door she had exited through and trying to understand what had just happened. His near drowning seemed almost secondary now, a catalyst for something larger that he could not yet name. For the first time in 3 years, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. 3 days later, Elena accepted his offer. She moved into the guest house, a charming 2-bedroom cottage that overlooked the garden she had been tending. Her new position remained undefined, a source of endless confusion for the rest of the staff. She was not a nurse, not a personal assistant, not a companion in any traditional sense. She simply existed in Marcus's orbit, a constant presence that defied categorization. They ate breakfast together on the terrace, watching the pelicans dive for fish in the morning surf. They argued about books, discovering a shared love of crime fiction and a mutual contempt for literary pretension. She pushed his wheelchair through the garden and named the plants for him, teaching him the difference between jasmine and gardenia, between California poppies and African daisies. She also refused to treat him with kid gloves. "You know," she said one afternoon, watching him struggle with a bottle cap he could usually manage, "you could just ask for help." "I don't need help." "Your face is turning red. That cap is winning." "I don't need help," he repeated through gritted teeth, his fingers slipping on the plastic for the 3rd time. Elena sighed, walked over, and plucked the bottle from his hands. She opened it with an easy twist and handed it back. "There. Was that so hard?" "I could have done it." "Sure. In another 20 minutes. But I've got things to do, and watching you fight with a water bottle isn't one of them." He should have been angry. Any other employee would have been fired for such insolence. But Marcus found himself laughing instead, that same rusty sound that had surprised them both by the pool. It came easier now, less like a muscle being strained, and more like one being exercised. "You're impossible," he said. "So I've been told." She sat down across from him, stretching her legs out on the lounge chair. "My last foster mother said I had a problem with authority. My caseworker said I was oppositionally defiant. My therapist said I just didn't trust people to have my best interests at heart. Do you trust people, I mean? Some people. The ones who earn it. Have I earned it?" She considered the question seriously, tilting her head as she looked at him. The late afternoon sun caught her hair, bringing out hidden strands of copper among the brown. "You're trying to. That counts for something." It was not a ringing endorsement, but Marcus found himself valuing it more than any praise he had received in years. Elena's approval meant something precisely because it was not given freely. Every small sign of acceptance felt like a victory, hard-won and genuinely earned. As the weeks turned into months, something shifted between them. The awkwardness faded, replaced by an easy familiarity that Marcus had not experienced since his college years. Elena learned his rhythms, the times of day when his pain was worst, the triggers that sent him spiraling into dark moods. He learned hers, the way she grew quiet when something reminded her of her childhood, the nightmares that sometimes woke her in the early hours. One evening, as autumn deepened and the days grew shorter, they sat together in his study watching the sunset. The sky was on fire, streaked with crimson and gold, and the ocean reflected the colors back in rippling waves of light. "What were you like before?" she asked. "Before the accident, I mean." Marcus was silent for a long time. He had avoided this conversation with everyone. deflecting questions about his past with practiced ease. His therapist had tried to get him to discuss it. His doctor had suggested it might help with his recovery. He had refused both, preferring to let the man he used to be fade into a kind of comfortable fiction. But Elena deserved honesty. She had given him nothing less. Arrogant, he said finally. Ambitious. Driven to the point of obsession. I worked 18-hour days and thought sleep was for the weak. I had a corner office in San Francisco that I decorated with awards and press clippings, like a shrine to my own success. I had relationships, but they were always secondary to the company. I treated people like resources to be optimized rather than humans to be valued. Sounds lonely. It was, but I didn't know it then. I thought I was winning. I thought if I just achieved enough, accumulated enough, controlled enough, I would finally feel something. Satisfaction, happiness, whatever it is that normal people feel when they're not chasing the next milestone. And the motorcycle? He closed his eyes. The memory was always there, lurking at the edges of his consciousness, but he rarely let himself revisit it directly. Even now, 3 years later, the images came with a visceral power that made his stomach clench. It was a Sunday morning, late May. I'd been working all weekend on a merger, the biggest deal of my career. We were acquiring a competitor, and the negotiations had been brutal. By Saturday night, I'd been awake for almost 40 hours. I was wired, couldn't sleep, my mind racing with numbers and projections and contingencies. He paused, gathering himself. Elena waited in patient silence. So I decided to take the bike up the coast, clear my head. The Pacific Coast Highway at dawn. It's beautiful. You've seen it. The cliffs, the ocean, the fog burning off as the sun rises. I thought an hour on the bike would reset me, help me sleep. What happened? I was going too fast. I always went too fast. That was part of the appeal, the speed, the risk, the feeling of being right at the edge of control. There was a curve, the famous one near Point Dume. Some gravel on the road, probably from a landslide. The bike went over the cliff. I went with it. How did you survive? Luck, or bad luck depending on how you look at it. I landed on a ledge about halfway down. A hiker saw the crash from the beach and called for help. The paramedics had to rappel down to reach me. They thought I was dead when they got there. Sometimes I wish I had been. Elena reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him voluntarily, and the contact sent a shock through his system. Her hand was warm and calloused from her work in the garden, strong and real in a way that grounded him. "Don't say that," she said quietly. "Why not? It's true. I lost everything that mattered to me. The ability to walk, to run, to swim. The independence I'd spent my whole life building. Even the company is running without me now. My CFO handles everything. I just collect dividends and pretend I'm still relevant." "You're not your legs," Elena said. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. "You're not your company. You're not the things you can or can't do. You're a person, a difficult, stubborn, occasionally insufferable person, but a person nonetheless." He looked at their joined hands, his larger one engulfing her smaller one. "You're the only one who thinks so. Then everyone else is wrong." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, something he had thought was dead and buried beneath 3 years of grief and isolation. He recognized it with a start. Hope. Small and fragile, like a seedling pushing through cracked earth, but unmistakably alive. In the weeks that followed, Elena began to share more of her own story, piece by piece, like someone carefully unpacking a suitcase that had been locked for years. She told him about the group home in Fresno, where she had spent her earliest years, a crowded place that smelled of industrial cleaner, and too many bodies in too small a space. She told him about the foster families, some kind and some not, each one leaving its mark on her like rings in a tree. There was one family, she said one evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of pink and gold. The Hendersons. I was with them for almost 2 years, from when I was 9 until just after I turned 11. They had a garden, tomatoes and peppers and beans climbing up wooden stakes. Mrs. Henderson taught me how to plant things, how to nurture them, how to wait for them to grow. Is that where you learned to love gardening? Elena nodded, her expression soft with memory. She used to say that gardens are the most honest places in the world. You can't fake a garden. Either you do the work and things grow, or you don't and they die. There's no shortcuts, no politics, no manipulation, just cause and effect. What happened to them, the Hendersons? The softness faded, replaced by something harder, more guarded. Mr. Henderson got transferred for work. They moved to Ohio. The social workers said I couldn't go with them. Something about cross-state placement being too complicated. So I went back into the system. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. And Mrs. Henderson taught me something important before I left. Elena turned to look at him, her dark eyes serious. She said that home isn't a place or a family or even a person. It's a feeling. And once you find that feeling, you carry it with you wherever you go. Have you found it? That feeling? She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the ocean. I'm starting to, she said finally. I'm starting to. Marcus thought about that conversation often in the days that followed. He thought about what it meant to find home after years of homelessness, what it meant to trust after a lifetime of betrayal. He thought about Elena's quiet strength, her fierce independence, her refusal to be pitied or patronized. She was, he realized, the most remarkable person he had ever met. And she was becoming, against all odds, his friend. The friendship deepened through shared routines and unexpected moments. They developed a habit of playing chess in the evenings, a game Marcus had not touched since the accident. Elena was a terrible player at first, losing within minutes of each game's start, but she approached defeat with the same stubborn determination she brought to everything else. Again, she would say, resetting the pieces before he could even gloat. I'm going to figure this out. Chess takes years to master. Decades, really. Then we'd better keep playing. By the 3rd month, she could hold her own for at least 20 moves. By the 6th, she won her first game. A hard-fought battle that ended with her queen pinning his king to the back row, while her lone remaining knight blocked his only escape. Checkmate, she said, her face alight with triumph. Marcus stared at the board, replaying the last several moves in his mind, trying to understand how he had missed her strategy. You sacrificed your rook on purpose. 3 moves ago. It looked like a mistake. It was supposed to look like a mistake. That's devious. That's chess. She leaned back in her chair, grinning. Mrs. Henderson taught me that too. She said life is all about making sacrifices that look like mistakes until suddenly you've won. He laughed, a sound that came easily now, no longer rusty or strange. I think I would have liked Mrs. Henderson. She would have liked you too. She always had a soft spot for stubborn people. Their conversations ranged widely, from the profound to the ridiculous. They debated whether hot dogs counted as sandwiches, analyzed the economic implications of various streaming services, argued passionately about the best coffee brewing method. Elena maintained that pour-over was superior. Marcus insisted on the merits of a good espresso machine. Neither convinced the other, but the arguments themselves became a kind of ritual, a way of filling the house with voices and opinions and life. Marcus found himself looking forward to these exchanges with an intensity that surprised him. He had spent years surrounded by people who agreed with everything he said, yes men and sycophants, who told him what they thought he wanted to hear. Elena's willingness to challenge him, to push back, to call him out when he was being unreasonable, felt like a gift he had not known he was missing. You know, she said one afternoon, after a particularly spirited debate about the merits of various national parks. "You're not as much of a curmudgeon as you pretend to be." "I'm not pretending. I'm genuinely curmudgeonly." A genuine curmudgeon wouldn't spend 45 minutes explaining why Yosemite is underrated. A genuine curmudgeon would just grunt and go back to his quarterly reports. "Maybe I'm a curmudgeon with depth. Or maybe you're a softy in a curmudgeon costume." He tried to look offended, but a smile kept tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's slander. That's observation." She stood up, stretching. "Come on. It's beautiful outside. Let's go argue about the garden." They spent the next hour touring the grounds, Elena pointing out the changes she had made since taking over as groundskeeper and then as whatever undefined role she now occupied. The jasmine along the south wall had been pruned and was thriving. The rose garden had been expanded to include varieties that bloomed in different seasons. A new section of drought-resistant natives had been established near the cliff's edge, their silver leaves catching the afternoon light. "This is incredible," Marcus said, looking around at the transformation. "I barely recognized some of these areas. Gardens need love and attention. They were surviving before, but they weren't thriving. There's a difference. I suppose that applies to more than just plants." Elena met his eyes. "I suppose it does." The moment stretched between them, pregnant with unspoken possibility. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the California sun. He was on the verge of saying something, though he could not have identified what, when his phone buzzed with an urgent notification from his company. The moment broke. Elena turned back to the garden, pointing out a patch of California poppies that had self-seeded from the original planting. Marcus answered his phone, dealing with whatever minor crisis demanded his attention. But even as he spoke with his CFO about stock options and quarterly projections, a part of his mind remained in that suspended moment, wondering what might have happened if the phone had not rung. As winter arrived, bringing with it the rare gift of rain to drought-plagued Southern California, Marcus and Elena developed a new ritual. On rainy evenings, they would sit in the great room with cups of hot tea, watching the storm roll in from the Pacific. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering an unobstructed view of the sky's fury as lightning crackled over the waves and thunder shook the house to its foundations. "I love storms," Elena said during one such evening, her face illuminated by the flash of lightning. "They're the great equalizer. Doesn't matter how much money you have or how big your house is. When the thunder rolls, everyone feels small." That sounds ominous. It's not. It's comforting. It's a reminder that we're all just tiny creatures on a big planet, doing our best to survive. She took a sip of her tea. The group home kids used to be terrified of storms. Too loud, too unpredictable, but I always loved them. They made me feel like all the chaos in my life was just part of something bigger, something natural. And now? Do you still feel like your life is chaotic? She considered the question, her eyes still on the storm. Less so. The chaos used to be external, things happening to me that I couldn't control. Foster homes, social workers, all of it. Now the chaos is mostly internal, trying to figure out who I am, what I want, where I belong. Have you figured it out? Some of it. She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. I know I like being here. I know I like this, whatever this is. This, he repeated. Our undefined arrangement? Our friendship? Our partnership? Our... She trailed off, seeming to search for the right word. Our home. The word landed between them like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples in every direction. Home. She had called this place, this house that he had built as a prison for himself, home. And in doing so, she had revealed something that he had been too afraid to acknowledge. "Elena," he said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." "When you pulled me out of that pool, I wanted to die. Not actively, not like I was planning anything, but I wasn't fighting it either. When I felt myself sinking, there was a moment, just a moment, where I thought, this is easier. This is the way out. And I almost let myself go. He had never admitted this to anyone, not his therapist, not his doctor, not the carefully chosen confidants who managed his business affairs. But somehow, sitting in the dark with the storm raging outside, the truth spilled out of him like water from an overturned cup. But then, you grabbed me, he continued. You hauled me to the surface like I mattered, like my life was worth saving. And when I looked into your eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in 3 years. I saw someone who wasn't afraid of me, wasn't afraid for me, just saw me as a person who needed help. He swallowed hard. You saved my life, Elena. Not just physically. You saved me from a slow death I was choosing every day by refusing to live. Elena set down her teacup. She moved from her chair to kneel beside his wheelchair, taking his hands in hers. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. Marcus, listen to me. I didn't save you. You were already fighting to survive, or you wouldn't have thrashed, wouldn't have reached for the surface, wouldn't have coughed up all that water and taken your first breath. The will to live was already in you. I just reminded you it was there. That's a generous interpretation. It's the truth. And here's another truth. She squeezed his hands tighter. You've saved me too. You gave me a home when I'd forgotten what that word meant. You gave me purpose and partnership, and a reason to wake up every morning that isn't just survival. You're not the only one who was drowning before we met. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, while the storm raged on outside. Something had shifted between them, some barrier falling that had been there since the beginning. Marcus felt lighter than he had in years, as if a weight he had not known he was carrying had finally been set down. So what happens now? He asked finally. Now we keep going. One day at a time. We tend the garden and play chess and argue about coffee. We figure out who we are and who we want to be, and we do it together. Together, he repeated. I like the sound of that. Elena smiled, and for the first time since the accident, Marcus Thornton believed that the future might actually be worth living. More months passed. Winter softened into spring, and spring blazed into summer. Marcus found himself changing in ways he had not anticipated. He began attending physical therapy sessions with something approaching enthusiasm. He started joining conference calls with his company again, offering insights and suggestions that his CFO gratefully received. He even, on a particularly warm June afternoon, allowed Elena to help him into the pool. The hydraulic lift hummed as it lowered him into the water. The temperature was perfect, warm enough to ease his perpetually tight muscles, but cool enough to be refreshing. Elena stood at the edge of the pool, ready to jump in if needed, her expression a mixture of pride and apprehension. For a long moment, Marcus just floated, supported by the water and the flotation belt she had insisted he wear. The sensation was strange and familiar all at once, like returning to a home he had thought demolished. How does it feel? Elena called. He tilted his head back, looking up at the sky. A hawk circled lazily overhead, riding the thermal currents that rose from the heated land. Like remembering something I forgot I knew, he said. After that, swimming became part of his daily routine again. Elena joined him in the pool most mornings, not as a nurse or a safety measure, but as a companion. She was not a graceful swimmer, her strokes more enthusiasm than technique, but she was determined. They raced each other, handicapped races that gave her a head start and him the advantage of upper body strength. More often than not, they ended up laughing too hard to finish. You're cheating, she accused one morning, after he had somehow managed to touch the wall first despite her 20-second lead. I'm optimizing, he corrected, grinning. Same thing. It absolutely is not. Cheating implies breaking rules. Optimizing implies finding efficiencies within them. She splashed water at him. That's the most Silicon Valley thing anyone has ever said to me. He splashed back. You love it. I tolerate it. There's a difference. But she was smiling as she said it, and the warmth in her eyes told him everything her words did not. It was on a quiet Thursday evening in late August that the phone call came. Marcus was in his study, reviewing quarterly reports that his CFO had sent over, when his cell phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Normally, he would have ignored it, allowing the call to go to voicemail for his assistant to sort through later. But some instinct he could not name, made him answer. Hello? The pause on the other end was long enough that he almost hung up. Then a voice, female and uncertain, spoke. Is this Marcus Thornton? Who's asking? My name is Nancy Chen. I'm calling about my niece, Lucia Chen. I believe you knew her about 9 years ago. The name hit him like a physical blow. Lucia. Dark hair, dark eyes, a laugh that filled rooms. They had met at a tech conference in San Francisco, two ambitious professionals circling each other like binary stars until gravity pulled them together. They had spent 3 weeks in a whirlwind of passion and connection, late nights talking about everything and nothing, early mornings tangled in hotel sheets that smelled of her perfume. And then he had ended things. A merger was closing, the most important deal of his career to that point. He had told her he needed to focus, that he couldn't give her what she deserved, that maybe when things settled down. But things never settled down. He never called. She never reached out. He had thought about her occasionally over the years, wondering what might have been if he had made different choices. I remember Lucia, he said carefully. What's this about? Another pause. This one waited with something he could not identify. Mr. Thornton, I'm sorry to tell you this over the phone, but Lucia passed away 3 months ago. Cancer. It was very sudden. The words did not make sense at first. Lucia, vibrant and alive in his memory, could not be reduced to past tense. She was 34, the same age as him. People their age did not die of cancer. People their age built companies and complained about gray hairs and argued about whether they were too young for aching joints. I'm so sorry, he said, and meant it. I had no idea. I hadn't spoken to her in years. I know. That's actually why I'm calling. Nancy's voice steadied, taking on a businesslike quality that suggested she had rehearsed this conversation. Before she died, Lucia told me something. About you. About your relationship. She asked me to contact you after she was gone. What did she tell you? Mr. Thornton, you have a daughter. Her name is Sophie. She's 8 years old, and she needs to know her father. The world tilted on its axis. Marcus gripped the arm of his wheelchair, suddenly grateful that he was already sitting down. A daughter. He had a daughter. For 8 years, somewhere out there, a child had been growing and learning and becoming a person, and she was his. That's not possible, he heard himself say. Lucia would have told me. She would have. She was afraid. Nancy's voice softened with sympathy. You ended things so suddenly, and she found out she was pregnant a few weeks later. She tried to call you, but you never answered. Then the accident happened, and she saw the news coverage. She thought you couldn't handle it. She thought it would be kinder to raise Sophie alone than to burden you with a child you hadn't asked for. Kinder? The word emerged as something between a laugh and a sob. She stole 8 years from me. 8 years of my daughter's life. I know how you feel. I told her the same thing, many times. But Lucia was stubborn, and she truly believed she was protecting everyone. Sophie, you, herself. She didn't want Sophie to grow up with a father who resented her, or a father who couldn't be there. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process the avalanche of information. A daughter. Sophie, 8 years old, growing up without him, without even knowing he existed. Where is Sophie now? Who's taking care of her? She's with me. I'm her great aunt. But Mr. Thornton, I have to be honest with you. I'm 73 years old, and my health isn't good. I can't give Sophie what she needs. The social workers have already started talking about foster care, and Her voice cracked. I can't let that happen to her. Not if there's another option. Foster care. The word sent ice through his veins. He thought of Elena, of all the homes that had failed her, all the years she had spent being passed from family to family like an unwanted package. He could not let that happen to his daughter. I want to see her, he said. I want to meet her. Are you sure? She doesn't know about you. All she knows is that her mother is gone and her world has fallen apart. This will be difficult for everyone. I'm sure. Whatever it takes. I want to know my daughter. After the call ended, Marcus sat alone in his study for a long time. The quarterly reports lay forgotten on his desk. The sunset blazed and faded outside his window. Somewhere, in a house in Sacramento, an 8-year-old girl was going to sleep without knowing that her whole life was about to change. Elena found him there hours later, still staring at nothing, his phone clutched in his hand. Marcus? What happened? You missed dinner. He looked up at her, this woman who had saved his life and taught him how to live it, and felt the words catch in his throat. I have a daughter, he said. Her name is Sophie. She's 8 years old. Elena did not exclaim or express shock or demand explanations. She simply sat down across from him and took his hands in hers. Tell me everything, she said. And he did. The meeting was arranged for a Sunday afternoon in late September, almost exactly a year after Elena had pulled Marcus from the pool. They had spent weeks coordinating with Nancy and a social worker named Patricia, navigating the complexities of a situation that had no clear precedent. Marcus had consulted lawyers, therapists, child psychologists. He had read books about grief and trauma and how to talk to children who had lost parents. None of it prepared him for the reality of watching the modest sedan pull up his long driveway, carrying his daughter. Nancy emerged from the driver's side first, a small woman with silver hair and tired eyes. She moved slowly, her arthritis evident in every careful step. Then the passenger door opened, and there she was. Sophie Chen Thornton, though she did not yet know the second part of her name, had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes. She was small for 8, thin in a way that spoke of grief and lost appetite. She wore a purple coat that was slightly too big, the sleeves rolled up to free her hands, and she clutched a stuffed rabbit with one matted ear as if it were the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. Marcus could not breathe. Looking at her was like looking at a mirror and a mystery all at once. He could see Lucia in the shape of her face, the curve of her lips, the way she held herself with quiet dignity. But the eyes were his, unmistakably, startlingly his. This was his daughter. This was the child he had never known, the legacy he had never intended, the gift he did not deserve. She's beautiful, he whispered. Elena stood beside him on the porch, her hand resting on his shoulder. She is. Now go meet her. The wheelchair hummed as he guided it down the accessible ramp. Nancy was helping Sophie out of the car, speaking to her in low, encouraging tones that he could not quite make out. When they reached the bottom of the ramp, Sophie looked up at him, and he saw wariness in her eyes, but also curiosity. Your house has a robot ramp, she observed. It was not a question, simply a statement of odd observation. It does, Marcus agreed. It helps me get around. Sophie studied the wheelchair with undisguised interest, her head tilting as she examined its various components. My mom said my dad got hurt. She said he couldn't walk anymore. Is that why you have the chair? Yes. The word came out thick, barely more than a whisper. Your mom told you about me? Not much, just that you were smart and nice, and that she wished things had been different. Sophie cocked her head, that same evaluating look that Marcus had seen 1,000 times in his own mirror. Are you really my dad? Marcus looked at this small, serious child and felt something break open in his chest. All the walls he had built, all the defenses he had constructed, crumbled before the simple power of her question. Yes, Sophie, I'm really your dad. I'm so sorry I wasn't there before. I didn't know. Mom said it wasn't your fault. She said grown-ups make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay as long as they try to fix them. Sophie took a step closer, her rabbit dangling from one hand. Are you going to try to fix it? I'm going to try, if you'll let me. Sophie considered this for a long moment, her expression so serious that she looked much older than 8. Then, with the unpredictable grace of childhood, she walked up the ramp and stood directly in front of his wheelchair. Can I see your house? Of course. Does it have a pool? It does. Can I swim in it? Maybe later. It's a little cold today. Sophie nodded, accepting this logic. Then she reached out and put her small hand on the arm of his wheelchair, resting it there like a claim being staked. My friend Mia said wheelchairs are for sick people, she said. But you don't look sick. You just look like a regular dad who has a cool chair. And with that simple observation, Sophie walked into the house and into Marcus's heart. The visit lasted 4 hours. Sophie explored every corner of the estate with the thorough attention of a detective investigating a crime scene. She examined the infinity pool from multiple angles, declared the home theater better than a real movie theater, and fell in love with the garden where Elena showed her the butterflies that had started arriving for their winter migration. She asked 1,000 questions, rapid fire and relentless. What did Marcus's company do? Why couldn't he walk? How did the elevator work? Did he know how to cook? Did he have any pets? Could she have a pet? What was his favorite color? Did he like butterflies too? He answered as best he could, sometimes hesitant, sometimes laughing, and began to remember what it felt like to be needed. Not as an object of care, not as a source of wealth, but as a person who mattered to someone, as a father. When it was time for Sophie to leave, she hugged him around the neck with surprising strength. Will I see you again? As often as you want, he promised. We can talk on the phone too, and video call, and write letters if you like letters. I like letters, Sophie said solemnly. Mom used to write me notes and put them in my lunchbox, little ones folded up really small. She said words on paper are more permanent than words in the air. After the car disappeared down the driveway, Marcus sat in the gathering dusk, watching the taillights fade into the distance. Elena found him there, still staring at the empty road, his eyes wet. She's amazing, he said. She's so much like Lucia. The way she looks at you, like she's figuring out your whole story with one glance. She is amazing, and she's yours. I want her here, permanently. I want to be her father, really be her father, not just some stranger she visits on weekends. Then you need to start the process. It won't be easy. A single man with a significant disability trying to get custody of an 8-year-old? There will be obstacles. I don't care about obstacles. I care about her. Elena sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I know you do. That's why I think you can do this. But Marcus, you need to understand something. If Sophie comes to live here, your whole life changes. No more hiding in your office. No more pretending the world doesn't exist beyond these walls. I know. Do you? Really? Because that little girl needs stability. She needs someone who shows up every single day, not just when it's convenient. Marcus turned to face her, his expression fierce with determination. I will show up, every day, whatever it takes. I've spent 3 years wallowing in self-pity, telling myself I had nothing to live for. But she's something to live for, Elena. She's everything to live for." Elena studied him for a long moment, and then she smiled, a real smile that transformed her serious face into something luminous. "Then we'd better get started." The custody process took 8 months. It was exactly as difficult as Elena had predicted. A labyrinth of legal requirements and psychological evaluations and home inspections that seemed designed to test the limits of human patience. Marcus submitted to every requirement without complaint, understanding that these hoops existed to protect Sophie. His disability was examined from every angle. Could he care for a child? Could he handle emergencies? What adaptations would be needed? The questions sometimes felt invasive, even insulting, but he answered them all with the same patient determination that had built his company. Throughout it all, Elena was his rock. She attended meetings, organized paperwork, and kept the household running smoothly while Marcus navigated the bureaucratic maze. She also became Sophie's unofficial favorite person during the increasingly frequent visits, the two of them bonding over gardening and art and terrible puns. "Why did the Scarecrow win an award?" Sophie asked one evening, her face alight with anticipation. "I don't know," Elena said, playing along. "Why?" "Because he was outstanding in his field." They collapsed into giggles while Marcus shook his head in mock despair. "I'm raising a comedian," he said. "God help me." "You love it," Elena countered. He did. He loved all of it. The chaos and the noise and the constant demands on his attention. He loved the way Sophie's face lit up when she mastered a new chess move. He loved the drawings she made and taped to his refrigerator, colorful explosions of imagination that transformed his sterile kitchen into a gallery. He loved the sound of her laughter echoing through halls that had been silent for too long. The final custody hearing was held on a Thursday in late May, almost 2 years after Elena had saved his life. Marcus wore his best suit. Sophie wore a blue dress that matched his tie, a coordination she had insisted upon with the gravity of a diplomat negotiating peace. Judge Patricia Mendez presided, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes who had clearly seen every possible variation of family drama and emerged with her faith in humanity somehow intact. "Mr. Thornton," she said after reviewing the case file, "I've read the reports. I've spoken with the social workers and the psychologists. I've observed you and Sophie together during supervised visits. But I'd like to hear from you directly. Why should this court grant you custody?" Marcus had prepared a speech. He had written and rewritten it, memorized every word, practiced delivery with Elena serving as audience. But in that moment, looking at Sophie's anxious face in the front row, all his prepared remarks vanished. "Your Honor," he said slowly, 3 years ago, I lost the ability to walk. I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to a person. I spent years believing that my life was over, that I had nothing left to offer the world. I was wrong." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The courtroom was silent, waiting. "Then I discovered I had a daughter, a brilliant, funny, complicated daughter who had lost her mother and needed someone to care for her. And I realized that all the things I thought I had lost, they don't matter. Walking doesn't matter. Running doesn't matter. What matters is being there, showing up, loving someone so much that you become a better version of yourself just to be worthy of that love." His voice cracked slightly, but he continued. "I can't promise Sophie a perfect life. I can't promise that there won't be challenges or difficulties or days when everything feels impossible. But I can promise her that I will be there. Every single day, for as long as I live, I will be her father in every way that matters." Judge Mendez turned her attention to Sophie. "Sophie, can you come here, please?" Sophie approached the bench, clutching Mr. Buttons with white-knuckled intensity. "Sophie, I need to ask you something important," the judge said gently. "Do you want to live with your father?" Sophie nodded vigorously, her dark hair bouncing. Yes, Your Honor. He makes terrible jokes and he always beats me at chess, and sometimes he gets sad and thinks nobody notices. But I notice, and I give him extra hugs on those days. He's my dad. I want to stay with him forever. Judge Mendez smiled. Well then, I think that settles it. The paperwork took another hour, but Marcus barely noticed. Sophie was officially, legally, permanently his daughter. She launched herself into his lap the moment they left the courtroom, wrapping her arms around his neck. We did it, Dad. We did it. We did it, he agreed, his eyes meeting Elena's over his daughter's head. All of us. That night, they celebrated with pizza and a Disney movie marathon. Sophie fell asleep on the couch between Marcus and Elena, her head resting on her father's shoulder, Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm. Marcus looked at the child's peaceful face, at the woman who had become indispensable to his life, and felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Contentment. Complete, uncomplicated contentment. Thank you, he said quietly to Elena. For what? For saving me. Not just from the pool. For saving me from the life I was living before. For bringing me Sophie. For everything. Elena reached across Sophie's sleeping form and took his hand. You saved yourself, Marcus. I just reminded you that it was possible. 2 more years passed. Sophie grew taller and bolder, shedding the grief that had defined her early days like a snake shedding skin. She started middle school at the local academy, made friends who came over for pool parties and sleepovers, joined a youth chess club where she regularly defeated opponents twice her age. Marcus, too, continued to transform. He returned to active involvement with his company, not with the obsessive intensity of his pre-accident days, but with a measured engagement that left room for family dinners and weekend adventures. He sat on the board of a nonprofit that provided resources for disabled athletes. He gave speeches at conferences about accessibility and innovation. He was, for the first time in his life, genuinely happy. And always at the center of everything was Elena. Their relationship had evolved gradually, almost imperceptibly. She still maintained her own space in the guest house, still held her title as household manager. But somewhere along the way, the boundaries between employee and friend and something more had begun to dissolve. It was Sophie who finally forced the issue. Dad, she said one evening, looking up from her homework with the calculating expression that always preceded trouble. Are you ever going to ask Elena to marry you? Marcus choked on his coffee. What? You love her. She loves you. You already basically live together. You should get married. That's how these things work. Sophie, it's not that simple. Why not? He opened his mouth to explain, to list the countless reasons why a relationship between them was complicated. Elena deserved better than a man in a wheelchair. They had a good thing and shouldn't risk ruining it. The power imbalance of their original dynamic might always shadow their relationship. She had never given any indication that she wanted more than friendship. But Sophie cut him off. Dad, you're doing that thing where you think too much. Mom used to say that about you. She said you were so busy planning for problems that you forgot to enjoy the good stuff. Your mother said that. In her letters, the ones she wrote me before she died, she told me lots of things about you. Sophie's expression softened. She said you were the best man she ever knew, but you didn't believe it. She said if you ever found someone who made you happy, you should hold on tight and never let go. Marcus stared at his daughter, this wise child who carried her mother's heart and her father's stubbornness and a grace all her own. When did you get so smart? He asked. I've always been smart. You just weren't paying attention. That night, after Sophie was in bed, Marcus found Elena in the garden. She was tending to the roses, pruning dead blooms by the light of the patio lamps, her hands moving with practiced ease among the thorns. Can we talk? He asked. She straightened, brushing soil from her gloves. Of course. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. At least I hope nothing's wrong. He took a deep breath. Sophie asked me today why I haven't proposed to you. Elena went very still. Did she? She did. She seems to think we're in love and should just get on with it already. Kids. Elena's voice was carefully neutral. They say the strangest things. Elena. He wheeled closer, reaching for her hand. She's not wrong. I do love you. I've loved you for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know if you felt the same way. Elena was quiet for a long moment. The garden was silent around them, except for the distant sound of waves breaking on the beach below. Then she knelt beside his wheelchair, bringing herself to his eye level, and cupped his face in her hands. Marcus Thornton, she said softly. I pulled you out of that pool 4 years ago, and I've been falling deeper ever since. I love your stubbornness and your terrible jokes and the way you look at Sophie like she hung the moon. I love that you never gave up, even when everyone thought you should. I love you. He kissed her then, properly kissed her for the first time, and it was everything he had imagined and more. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Elena laughed. I suppose this means I should move out of the guest house. Or I could move in with you. The cottage has better light. It also has 2 bedrooms. Perfect for when Sophie decides she needs a change of scenery. Elena traced the line of his jaw with her finger. Are we really doing this? If you'll have me, wheelchair and all. The wheelchair is the least interesting thing about you. She kissed him again, lighter this time. Yes, Marcus, I'll have you. All of you. Forever. They were married on the beach in front of the house, on a perfect September afternoon with the Pacific as their witness. Sophie served as both flower girl and ring bearer, roles she took with tremendous seriousness. Nancy, frail but beaming, came down from Sacramento and wept through the entire ceremony. Even Diana Chen, the unflappable house manager, dabbed at her eyes during the vows. I, Marcus James Thornton, take you, Elena Rose Vasquez, to be my wife. I promise to love you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, in stubbornness and surrender. I promise to never stop trying to be worthy of you. I promise to hold on tight and never let go. I, Elena Rose Vasquez, take you, Marcus James Thornton, to be my husband. I promise to love you wholly and completely, without reservation or condition. I promise to remind you every day that you are more than your limitations, more than your past, more than anything the world has tried to make you. I promise to build a life with you that is worth living. When they kissed, Sophie cheered. The small gathering of guests applauded. And somewhere above, Marcus liked to think, Lucia smiled. 5 years later, on a Sunday morning in late spring, Marcus sat on the terrace watching the ocean. Sophie was 18 now, home from her first year at Stanford, and full of stories about professors and friends and all the adventures waiting in her future. She had grown into a remarkable young woman, confident and kind, carrying the best of both her parents in her bearing and her spirit. Dad! Her voice rang out across the garden. Come see! The baby turtles are hatching! They had established a turtle conservation area on their stretch of beach years ago, part of Marcus's commitment to giving back to the community that had embraced him. Each year, they watched the nests, protected the eggs, and celebrated when the hatchlings made their journey to the sea. He guided the wheelchair down the accessible path to the beach. Elena was already there, kneeling in the sand beside Sophie, both of them watching with breathless wonder as tiny sea turtles emerged from their nest and began their perilous journey toward the water. There must be 50 of them, Elena said as Marcus arrived. 63, Sophie corrected. I counted. They watched in silence as the baby turtles made their way across the sand, following the ancient instinct that would carry them into the ocean and out into the vast unknown. Some would survive, others would not, but all of them would try, because that was what life demanded. You tried. You kept moving forward. You never stopped believing that the ocean was worth reaching. Marcus felt Elena's hand slip into his, warm and familiar. On his other side, Sophie leaned against the wheelchair, her head resting on his shoulder, just as it had when she was 8. "This is perfect," she said quietly. "Right here. Right now. This is everything." Marcus looked at his daughter, at his wife, at the endless blue of the Pacific stretching toward the horizon. He thought about the day he had fallen into the pool, about the woman who had pulled him out, about the child he had never known he wanted. "Yes," he agreed. "This is everything." The turtles reached the water one by one, disappearing into the waves. The sun rose higher in the sky, and on a beach in Malibu, a family that had been built from broken pieces and stubborn hope watched the world begin anew, knowing that love had made it all possible. That evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus found himself alone in his study. The walls were covered with photographs, a gallery of memories that documented the transformation of his life. Sophie as a gap-toothed 8-year-old, clutching her rabbit on the day they met. Elena in her wedding dress, laughing at something he had said. The three of them at Disneyland, at Christmas, at Sophie's high school graduation. Family portraits taken on this beach, year after year, showing Sophie growing taller, and Marcus growing older, and Elena's smile never changing. On his desk sat a framed drawing, faded now with age. Sophie had made it during her first week in the house, a childish rendering of 3 figures, a man in a wheelchair, a woman with dirt on her hands, and a little girl holding a rabbit. Underneath, in careful crayon letters, she had written, "My family." He touched the drawing gently, thinking about all the paths that had led to this moment. The accident that had stolen his ability to walk but given him the stillness to see what truly mattered. Lucia, who had loved him enough to let him go and trusted him enough to leave him their daughter. Elena, who had jumped into a pool without thinking and stayed to save him in ways neither of them had anticipated. There was a knock at the door. Elena entered, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Sophie's packing for tomorrow," she reported, handing him 1 glass. "She's bringing half her closet back to Stanford. She gets that from her mother." He took a sip. "I traveled with 1 bag until I was 30. And look at you now. 3 closets full of adaptive clothing. I contain multitudes." Elena laughed and settled into the chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors fade from the sky. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked. "The day we met?" "Every day." He reached for her hand. "I think about how close I came to dying, and how everything I have now, Sophie, you, this life, none of it would exist if you hadn't been trimming that jasmine." The jasmine was looking scraggly. Someone had to take care of it. "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Elena smiled, that same warm smile that had been greeting him every morning for years. "I know, but I like reminding you that heroism is sometimes just being in the right place at the right time. And staying," he said. "You stayed. That was the real heroism." "Where else would I go? I'd already found everything I was looking for." They sat like that until the stars came out, their hands intertwined, watching the world turn beneath a sky full of possibility. Years later, when Sophie had children of her own, she would tell them the story of how their grandfather and grandmother met. She would describe the pool and the rescue, the wheelchair and the garden, the way 2 broken people had found each other and built something whole. "The thing about love," she would say, watching her own children play on the same beach where baby turtles still hatched each spring, "is that it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect circumstances. It just happens, and then it's up to you to decide what to do with it. Her children would ask if it was a true story, and Sophie would smile. Every word, she would tell them. Every single word. And then she would call them in for dinner. And the house on the cliff would fill with laughter and argument and the beautiful chaos of family, just as it had done for decades, just as it would continue to do for decades more. Because that was the legacy Marcus and Elena had built. Not a fortune or a company, or any of the things the world might have expected from a tech billionaire and the groundskeeper who saved his life. Just love. Just family. Just the simple, extraordinary miracle of people choosing each other, again and again, through all the seasons of their lives. And really, what more could anyone ask for?